Have you ever seen a moment so powerful it made an entire room stop breathing? It happened that night at the city's most exclusive gala. Golden chandeliers, billionaires in tuxedos, cameras flashing like lightning. And in the middle of all that luxury stood a fragile old woman holding a torn handbag against her chest. Her shoes were worn. Her clothes faded. No one knew who she was. And maybe that's why they laughed. She must have snuck in. "Whose grandma is this?" "Security, get her out of here." But she didn't speak. She just stood there, eyes trembling, searching for something. Or someone. Then the crowd shifted, and the lights caught him. The youngest billionaire in the country, walking to the stage, confident, untouchable. People cheered. Cameras screamed his name, Ethan Cross. Every eye followed him, except hers. Her gaze never left his face, because she knew that face. She made that face, and then it happened. He turned, saw her, and everything froze. His smile vanished. His hands began to shake. And before anyone could understand what was happening, the billionaire everyone admired dropped to his knees and whispered the word that silenced the entire room. "Mom." You could hear hearts breaking. You could see tears where laughter had been seconds ago. Because that night, the richest man in the room didn't see a poor old woman. He saw the teacher who gave him everything when she had nothing. They say a teacher's reward is the success of her students. But what happens when the world moves on, and the one who gave everything is left behind? Long before there were ballrooms and billionaires, there was a small, broken classroom at the edge of the city. Peeling paint, cracked windows, and a chalkboard that coughed dust every time she wrote. That was her world, Mrs. Evelyn Grace. Every morning she'd arrive before sunrise. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted her students to see that hope always showed up early. Her hands, worn and trembling, held more than chalk. They held patience, kindness, and a belief that even the smallest child could shine. There were days she skipped her own meals so she could buy a sandwich for the kid who came hungry. Nights she stayed behind, grading papers by candlelight because the electricity bill went unpaid again. And when the school ran out of notebooks, she tore old pages from her diaries and handed them to the children. "Use these," she'd whisper, smiling. "Your dreams deserve to be written somewhere." She believed every child had a spark, and she would spend her entire life lighting them, one by one. But the world doesn't always remember the hands that held it up. Years passed. Her hair turned silver, her voice softer, her salary smaller. The classroom that once echoed with laughter grew silent, dust settling where dreams once stood. One evening the principal walked in, avoiding her eyes. He handed her an envelope and said softly, "We're shutting down, Evelyn." "There's no more funding," she smiled, not out of peace, but out of habit. That same gentle smile she used when children cried on their first day of school. "It's okay," she whispered. "I suppose it's time," but inside, she felt something break. Not just the end of her career, the end of her purpose. She packed her books, old lesson plans, faded certificates, and a photograph of her very first class, a group of smiling faces she swore she'd never forget. Among them, a young boy with kind eyes and worn shoes. He was quiet, shy, but brilliant, the one who always stayed behind to help her clean the chalkboard. She used to tell him, "Ethan, promise me something. No matter how far you go, never forget who believed in you first." He nodded, eyes full of dreams. "One day I'll make you proud, Miss Grace," he said. But time, it has a way of testing promises. Years turned into decades. She lost touch with every student. She watched from the sidelines as the city grew richer, while her own world grew smaller. The same hands that once held chalk now trembled as they held a broom. To survive, she cleaned offices, houses, and sometimes even schools, the same kind of classrooms where new teachers stood and no one remembered her name. Every paycheck barely kept the lights on. Every night she sat beside the window, flipping through those old photos, talking to the faces that never answered back. "You all grew up so fast," she'd whisper. "I hope you're happy." I hope I did enough. She never blamed anyone. Not the system, not the world, not even time. because deep down, she still believed her sacrifices meant something. That somewhere one of those children remembered her. But the cruelest part of life isn't loneliness. It's being forgotten by the very people you helped rise. And then one day, she received an invitation, handwritten, gold-lined, elegant. The Cross Foundation Gala, honoring education and leadership. She stared at it for hours. Her name wasn't printed on it. It was sent to the school where she once worked. The secretary found it in the old records and forwarded it to her, thinking she might want to see how far her school had come. At first, she hesitated. Her dress was old, her shoes worn. What business did she have in a place full of millionaires? But something in her heart whispered, "Go." Maybe she'd see a familiar face. Maybe, just maybe, someone there would remember the woman who once believed in them. So that night, under the soft glow of the city lights, she walked to the Grand Hotel, holding her old handbag tight. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors, reflecting a woman who didn't belong there, at least not in their eyes. Guests turned, whispering, "Who invited her?" "Must be staff. Look at those shoes!" Each word felt like a knife, but she smiled anyway. Because after 40 years of teaching children how to stand tall, she wasn't about to bow now. She found a quiet corner near the back of the hall. Her eyes scanned the sea of unfamiliar faces. Politicians, businessmen, socialites. No one looked back, but then from across the room a banner caught her eye. Honoring Mr. Ethan Cross, Philanthropist of the Year. Her breath caught. The name hit her like lightning. Ethan. Her Ethan? The boy who stayed late after class? The boy who promised to make her proud? She tried to move closer, but the crowd was thick. Laughter echoed, champagne glasses clinked. And just as she reached the front, a young woman stopped her. "Excuse me, ma'am, this area is for guests only. I'm sorry," she whispered, backing away. Her voice cracked. She didn't want the car, the party, or the lights. She just wanted one look, one confirmation that her life had meant something. But before she could leave, the room erupted in applause. Ethan had arrived. And as he took the stage, tall and polished, the cameras flashed, while somewhere in the shadows, the woman who once taught him how to spell his name stood unnoticed, unseen, unheard. Her heart raced. Was it really him? Would he recognize her? Would he remember the nights she stayed behind, just to make sure he had food before going home? Every second stretched like forever. And as he began his speech, she pressed her trembling hands together and whispered, "Please, just remember me, Ethan." Just once, but he didn't see her. Not yet, because sometimes life holds its most powerful reunion for the exact moment the world is watching. And that moment was coming. They say time changes people, but it also reveals who they truly are. The lights shimmered across the ballroom, music floating through the air like it belonged to a different world. A world she had once helped create. Through every lesson, every notebook, every child she taught to dream. But tonight, that world pretended not to know her. She stood quietly near the buffet, clutching the strap of her old, fading handbag, the same one she used to carry attendance sheets in. The smell of expensive perfume filled the air. The sound of laughter bounced off the crystal chandeliers, and in the midst of it all, she stood, still as a shadow. A woman in her late 60s, face lined with the map of years well lived, eyes filled with a tenderness the world no longer recognized. She reached for a glass of water. Her fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the weight of being unseen for too long. And that's when she heard it. The whisper. "Who let her in here?" The words sliced through the air, sharp and deliberate. A young woman in a diamond necklace leaned toward her friend, smirking. "She must be staff. Maybe catering." The other woman laughed. "Catering? Please. Look at those shoes. My maid dresses better than that." The laughter spread like wildfire, soft at first, then louder, braver. People glanced her way, curious, mocking, cruel. A few turned away out of politeness. Most didn't bother hiding their smirks. She tried to smile. Not because it didn't hurt, but because that's what she had done all her life. smile through the ache, so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. She lowered her eyes, murmuring softly to herself, "It's all right, Evelyn. You've faced worse." But inside, the memories rushed back. The years of standing in front of classrooms that smelled of chalk and hope. The little hands she held when children cried. The laughter of students who used to call her mom when their real mothers couldn't come to school plays. And now, here she was, being mocked by adults who once were just like them, lost, ungrateful, unaware of the sacrifices that made their world possible. One man, older, heavy with arrogance, raised his glass and said, "Excuse me? Miss, the floor near my table could use some cleaning." Laughter erupted. A few people gasped, others giggled behind their hands. Even the waiter looked away, embarrassed. Her throat tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she straightened her posture, as if standing taller could keep her dignity intact. Her heart beat slowly, painfully. She whispered under her breath, "They don't know, Evelyn. They don't know who you were." She wanted to scream. "I taught your children. I wrote their first alphabets with them. I believed in them when no one else did." But the words stayed trapped in her chest, because sometimes silence is the only armor the broken can wear. She turned away, trying to disappear into the crowd. But humiliation has a way of finding those who try to escape it. A businessman, tall and smug, stopped her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, feigning politeness. "Could you fetch another drink?" "Mine's gone warm." A few chuckles followed. She froze. The air around her seemed to thicken. She wanted to tell him she wasn't staff, that she had once taught kids who went on to become doctors, writers, dreamers. But the words refused to come. Instead, she nodded slightly and said, "I'm sorry, sir. I don't work here." He laughed. "Oh, then why are you here? Crashing parties for free food?" Someone else whispered, "Maybe she's one of those charity cases they bring in for sympathy." "Or maybe she got lost." Another voice added. Each comment hit like a stone. The room felt colder, the music distant, the laughter hollow, but even then she didn't cry. Her eyes, though heavy with pain, still carried the strength of someone who had weathered storms and walked through them quietly. She found a chair near the back and sat down. Her reflection flickered in the polished floor. A woman once strong, now invisible, and yet she held on to one small hope. The boy, her Ethan. He was somewhere in this room. She was sure of it. Her heart wouldn't stop racing. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, because deep down she believed that if he saw her, he'd remember. She whispered to herself, "He promised. He said he'd make me proud." As she sat there, humiliated yet hopeful, the laughter around her began to fade into the background. Her mind drifted back to the past, to the day Ethan left school. He was only 12 then. Too small for the weight he carried, too old for the dreams he already held. She remembered sitting beside him after class, his shoes torn, his lunch untouched. "Miss Grace," he said softly, "when I grow up, I'll buy you a big school, with bright lights and clean floors. You won't have to teach in the dark anymore." She smiled that day and said, "Ethan, I don't need a big school. I just need you to never forget where you came from." Those words had lived in her heart ever since. And now, as she sat among the cruel laughter of strangers, those memories were the only warmth she had left. Then a sudden hush spread through the hall. The lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest of honor, Mr. Ethan Cross." Every head turned. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed, and for the first time that night the old teacher lifted her head. There he was, tall, poised, every bit the man he once promised he'd become. She gasped softly. Her heart leapt. Pride and disbelief tangled in her chest. But before she could move, the businessman who mocked her earlier chuckled and said, "Now he's someone worth meeting. Unlike some people who don't belong here." His words cut deep, but this time, she didn't lower her eyes. She looked straight ahead. Because through the crowd, Ethan's eyes were searching, calm, confident. but curious, almost like he could feel something, someone, calling out from the shadows of his past. Her fingers tightened around her old handbag. Inside it, the photo of her first class. She carried it everywhere, because hope, once planted, refuses to die. Her breath quickened as he stepped to the podium. The applause thundered, and for a moment she forgot the humiliation, the laughter, the whispers. Because in that moment, her heart remembered something the world had forgotten: the unbreakable bond between a teacher and her student. She didn't know it yet, but the boy she once believed in was about to change everything. Every cruel laugh, every whisper, every tear she swallowed was about to be silenced by the truth she had carried in her heart all along, the same truth he had carried in his. And as Ethan began to speak, the entire room leaned forward, unaware that their laughter was about to turn into silence. Because behind that humble woman they mocked stood a story they could never buy. A story that was about to break every heart in that ballroom, including his. The applause thundered like a storm. Every camera, every light in the ballroom turned toward the man who owned half the city. The billionaire. The genius. The success story every magazine loved to write about, Ethan Cross. He walked through the grand doors with calm confidence. A picture of perfection. Black suit sharp, smile controlled. The kind of man who'd mastered the art of pretending he belonged everywhere. But then, something broke in his stride, because across the golden-lit room, between the laughter, the arrogance, the champagne, he saw her. At first he thought it was his imagination, that maybe his tired mind was playing tricks again, the way it sometimes did when the lights went down and he remembered where he came from. But then she turned, that same gentle face. The eyes that once saw goodness in him before anyone else ever did. The trembling smile that told him he could do anything, if only he believed. The world around him began to fade. The music, the chatter, even the flash of cameras. All he could hear was a single voice echoing from the past. "Ethan, you're not poor. You're just waiting for your turn to shine." He froze. His chest tightened. His throat went dry. It was her, his teacher. The woman who had fed him when he came to school hungry. The one who stayed behind after class to teach him how to dream. The woman he hadn't seen in 20 years, the reason he even stood there that night. He tried to move forward, but his legs felt heavy, like each step was dragging through time itself. Because how do you walk toward the person who built you? When the world has spent years telling you that you built yourself? For a moment, he just stood there, frozen, watching her wipe a tear quietly as people around her laughed. And then, something inside him broke. Without saying a word, he began walking. Not toward the cameras, not toward the CEO table waiting for his speech, but toward her, the old woman standing alone at the edge of a world she once helped create. The laughter dimmed as people noticed. At first, a few smiles, polite confusion, then whispers, then silence, because the billionaire wasn't walking where he was supposed to. He was walking toward the woman they mocked. His friends exchanged glances. The photographers hesitated, unsure where to aim their lenses. And when he finally stopped, he didn't speak. He simply looked at her, and for a long moment, the world stopped spinning, her lips parted, trembling. She didn't recognize him at first. The suit, the wealth, the years had changed everything. But then she saw his eyes. Those same eyes she had looked into when he was just a frightened boy with nothing but potential. Ethan? She whispered, barely breathing the name. He exhaled shakily, his eyes wet now. And then, to the shock of everyone watching, he dropped to his knees before her. Gasps filled the air. Cameras flashed wildly, but he didn't care. He reached for her trembling hands, hands rough from decades of chalk and work, and said softly, "You remember when I told you I'd build you a school one day?" Her voice broke. "I remember. But, child, I thought you forgot." He shook his head slowly, tears spilling down his face. "Forgot, Miss Grace? I am who I am because of you. When my father left, When there was no food at home, you gave me a sandwich and said, "Don't let hunger make you small." When I failed that exam, you told me failure was just proof I was trying. You didn't just teach me math or words. You taught me how to fight. You gave me everything, when the world gave me nothing. The crowd was silent now, every whisper swallowed by guilt and awe. The same people who laughed moments ago were now watching a billionaire kneel before a woman in worn shoes, a woman they had dismissed as nobody. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something, an old, folded photograph. He held it up gently. This was my first day of school," he said, his voice trembling. "You held my hand because I was too scared to walk through the door alone. I carried this with me every day since." She covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Her fingers touched the edge of the photo, faded, cracked, yet still whole. Like her, the reporters lowered their cameras. The businessman who mocked her earlier turned pale, looking at the floor. The young woman in diamonds wiped her eyes quietly, and in the middle of the glittering chaos, the old teacher whispered, "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You kept your promise." He shook his head gently, tears falling onto her hands. "No, Miss Grace, you're the one who kept yours. You said your students would change the world. You were right. But I only did because you never stopped believing in me, even when I stopped believing in myself." Then he stood, not tall like a billionaire, but small like a boy again, and turned to the stunned crowd. His voice, once smooth and confident, now cracked with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, before you stand the woman who made me who I am. You call me successful. You call me a genius. But none of it is mine. It's hers. She taught me to write. She taught me to lead. And when I had nothing, she taught me to dream." He turned to her again and said softly, "You don't belong in the back of any room. Miss Grace, you built every one of us standing here." The crowd erupted into tears and applause. Some people covered their faces. Others simply bowed their heads, ashamed. The businessman who mocked her earlier stepped forward slowly and in a trembling voice said, I'm sorry, ma'am." She smiled gently, the same smile she used to give misbehaving students, and said, "Son, it's never too late to learn." The crowd gasped softly at her grace, and that one line alone silenced the last trace of arrogance in the room. Ethan turned to her, eyes glowing through tears. "From this day forward," he said, "you'll never work another day in your life. You'll never stand in the shadows again. The world will know your name, the teacher who changed everything." He gestured to the projector behind him. A massive screen lit up, showing a new logo, the Grace Foundation, schools for every child. The room erupted. Reporters forgot their questions. Guests forgot their wine. All they could see was love. Real, pure, raw love between a student and his teacher. And through it all, she just cried quietly, because the dream she thought had died years ago had just been reborn. Through him. He hugged her tightly, the kind of hug that says everything words can't. And for the first time that night, the old teacher didn't feel small, invisible, or out of place. She felt seen, honored, home. Because the boy she once believed in had finally reminded the world of something it had forgotten, that no success is ever built alone. And as cameras flashed one last time, Ethan whispered into her ear, "Mom, thank you for teaching me how to live before teaching me how to win." And in that instant, every heart in that ballroom broke, healed, and believed again. The applause rolled through the ballroom like thunder, not the kind born of excitement, but the kind born of gratitude. Ethan stood there, trembling, still holding her hand. The woman who once stood at the back of the room, invisible, now stood at the very center, where she always truly belonged. He turned toward her, eyes red but smiling through tears. And for the first time that night, he wasn't the billionaire everyone admired. He was just a student. Standing before his teacher, he gently took the microphone, his voice cracking as the room fell into perfect silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began softly, You all know me as Ethan Cross, the businessman, the investor, the CEO, but tonight, I want you to know who made Ethan Cross. He looked down at her, his lips trembling, tears tracing the corners of his smile. This woman, she's not my blood mother, he said, voice breaking, but she is the woman who taught me how to live. A hush fell. Even the sound of cameras stopped. Every pair of eyes in that golden hall turned toward the frail woman whose entire life had been spent giving, never asking. He continued. His words slow, heavy, and soaked in emotion. When I was a boy, I had nothing. No father, no food, no hope. I came to school barefoot once, and instead of scolding me, she took off her own shoes and said, "You'll run faster than anyone, Ethan." She taught me to believe when I had no reason to. She gave me strength when I had no one to lean on. And when I wanted to quit, she stayed after class every single time and whispered, "You can do this." Her lips quivered. She tried to hold back her tears, but it was useless. The moment had finally come, not one of pride, but of peace. Because she realized she hadn't been forgotten after all. Ethan's voice grew softer. When people say I built an empire, they're wrong. She did. Every lesson she taught me, every word she spoke, every time she refused to give up on a lost child like me. That's what built this. I am her work. I am her dream. The crowd broke into quiet sobs. Even the richest men in the room, men who thought success was measured in numbers, wiped their eyes in silence. Because in that one moment, every person remembered someone who once believed in them, and how easily they'd forgotten to say thank you. Ethan stepped closer, gently placed his arm around her shoulders, and said, "You told me once, Miss Grace, that the greatest thing a teacher can do is plant a seed in a heart she'll never see bloom. Well, tonight, your garden stands before you." He gestured toward the crowd, a crowd that now looked at her not with pity, but with reverence. Because in their eyes, she was no longer a forgotten teacher. She was a living legend. Her frail hands reached for his face. She smiled through her tears. "Ethan," she whispered, "I never needed to see your success. Knowing you believed in yourself, that was enough for me." He shook his head gently, tears still spilling. "Then let the world see what belief looks like." He turned to the audience again. "Tonight," he said, "I'm opening the Grace Foundation, a school for every child who dreams, just like I did. Because if one teacher could change a life, imagine what 1,000 could do." A wave of applause crashed through the hall, raw, uncontrollable, filled with emotion. Some clapped through tears. Others stood in silent awe. The cameras finally flashed again, not for Ethan, but for her. Every lens, every light, every heartbeat in that room pointed at the woman who once walked in unseen, and she simply smiled. Not a smile of pride, not a smile of fame, but the soft, trembling smile of a heart that finally felt seen after years of being invisible. She turned to Ethan, whispering softly, "You kept your promise, my boy." He smiled back. "No," he said. "We did." He helped her step onto the stage beside him. The lights glowed around her, her wrinkles shining like metals, her tears glimmering like diamonds. Every step she took echoed like a victory. Quiet, humble, but powerful enough to shake the souls of everyone watching. Reporters began asking for her name. Ethan raised the microphone again and said, "Her name is Grace. And Grace is exactly what she's given this world." The applause that followed wasn't just sound. It was healing. People who once mocked her now clapped until their hands hurt. Men who never said thank you to their own teachers called their mothers that night. Women who once felt unseen found hope again. Because sometimes, it only takes one act of gratitude to remind the world what truly matters. The music swelled softly in the background, a slow piano melody rising under her trembling laughter. The lights dimmed to gold, and as the crowd continued to stand, she leaned in and whispered, "You were always meant to shine, Ethan. I just showed you where to find the light." He hugged her tightly, the kind of embrace that carries 40 years of love, pain, and unspoken words. And as the world watched, it wasn't a billionaire holding his teacher. It was a son holding his mother, a mother who had never asked for recognition, a teacher who had never wanted applause, a woman who had quietly built her legacy in the hearts of others. The screen behind them faded to black, leaving only one sentence glowing in white letters. Never forget the hands that built your success. And for a moment, the entire world fell silent, because deep down everyone felt it, the sting of memories, the faces of those who once believed in us when no one else did. And in that silence, hearts broke and healed, together. Ethan held her hand as they left the stage, whispering softly, "You've taught your last lesson, Miss Grace." But tonight, the world finally learned it. She smiled, tears falling again. "Then my work is done." They walked out slowly, their shadows stretching long across the floor. One tall and strong, the other small but unshakable, like time itself bowing to love and legacy. Outside the hall, a cool breeze swept through the night. Reporters surrounded them, asking for quotes, for statements, for history. But Ethan just smiled and said, "No statement needed. Just remember, none of us got here alone." He helped her into the car, closed the door gently, and stood there for a moment, watching the woman who had once walked through rain just to make sure her students had class. As the car drove away, he whispered to himself, "I finally paid her back. Not with money, but with meaning." He turned back toward the city lights, the empire he built, and for the first time, it didn't feel like his. It felt like hers, because behind every shining success, there's always a quiet soul who believed first. That night, as the story spread across every screen, every phone, every heart, the world remembered her name, Grace, the teacher who raised a billionaire, and reminded millions that true success isn't about standing above others, it's about lifting them up. And in the glow of that story, one truth stood taller than all. The richest people in the world aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones who remember where they came from, and as the final line faded onto the screen, "The greatest wealth is the lives you've touched," the video ended, but the feeling it left behind stayed forever.